Okay, I think it has turned 7:30. Welcome, everyone. It's very nice to see you all. I'm just going to, I hope, share the screen with a. Excellent. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Just a couple of slides to begin with. Uh, just this is part of a series of talks, webinars that we've been doing now for a couple of years. These are in a series of building webinars, and we've had a number of people come to talk to us about a whole range of issues. And this one tonight's on parochial visitations. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. Um, if you want to book for sessions, you can do it through Insight, which is our new hub. And you'll see some of the topics that we've covered and are covering this term. And then to say to you that after the session's over, we'll send slides out to you. We're recording this session so that it can be put on the hub and others can come and listen to it, or you can listen to it again if you wish. It will become a resource that we can store in our archives. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay, good evening. I hope you can all hear me. Can you just wave at me if you can hear me? Oh, lovely. Yes, good evening. Very nice to see you all. So this should last about an hour. It's a real pleasure to have my friend and colleague Rich Henderson with us as well, who's the Archdeacon of Suffolk and at the moment also the Archdeacon of Ipswich. From tomorrow morning, he's also the Archbishop of Canterbury, I suspect. But it's very good to have him with us. I'm going to just set a little bit of context for us and then talk our way through the form. Now, that doesn't sound massively exciting, but we'll try and make it more exciting than it might otherwise sound. Just a few introductory comments. There are lots of visitations within the Church of England. The two that you might come across and might confuse are archdeacon's visitations and parochial visitations. So at archdeacon visitations, we admit church wardens to the office of church warden. But every archdeacon has a legal responsibility to inspect the churches in his or her jurisdiction, and these are done through something called a parochial visitation, which is a slightly different animal from the archdeacon's visitation. Though back in the day, hundreds of years ago, the two functions were all combined into what would have been episcopal visitations, when the bishop would have come and been amongst you. So parochial visitations started off as a way of swearing in church wardens, admitting church wardens, and to assess the morality of the clergy and the parishioners. That's a slightly more challenging aspect to these. And so archdeacons and rural deans would have held visitations in their respective archdeaconries or deaneries, sometimes every month. And it was, in effect, a court. And before a visitation commenced, there would have been a set of questions sent out, articles of inquiry, and you as church wardens or as clergy or even as school teachers or anybody who's named on the list would have completed these articles of inquiry that had been sent back to the archdeacon, and obviously he at this stage, he would then have used that as a basis for his visitation. And so you'd have listed, for example, all those who lived in your patch, and against their name, you may have made a comment. And we've got examples of people being in the Latin, but translated as being sort of morally blind, intellectually challenged, or of unsound mind and mad. So the rector got to label his parishioners with whatever he thought was an appropriate epithet. And then these were sent off to the archdeacon, who could then make his own judgments. But in a way, parochial visitations, I suppose, are a form of control. And they are a form of control. I mean, it's gentle control, but it is nevertheless control. And its origins are perhaps slightly less gentle. So after the English Civil War, when the state was trying to get its grip back on the church, visitations were a very powerful tool in order to try and achieve that. So from about the 1680s onwards, bishops sought to involve clergy rather than just church wardens in the process, and to make the visitations both administrative as well as judicial. So the archdeacon was hearing court cases. So if you'd been drunk or you'd committed adultery, or you'd sworn in public, or otherwise behaved badly, you might be brought before the Archdeacon at one of his monthly calls, and a fine, or you would put you in the stocks. I'm all for bringing it back myself, but I mean, it put you in the stocks, or some other appropriate punishment would have been inflicted. But the information gathered from these visitations has given us a really rich sort of account of how the church was forming itself in the 17th century. And actually, parochial visitation records are really key for those of you who are interested in local history, or the history of the diocese, or the history of your parish or benefice. Parochial visitations. I know my own archdeacon has been written up because I've got the books in front of me. But you can go back over these visitations, and what's really interesting is that the same things that bother us and worry us, on the whole, are the same things that bothered and worried our ancestors of some 300 years ago. So at the moment, as I speak to you in 2024, parochial visitations are administrative. They're not judicial. The Archdeacon is not coming round to inflict punishment. It may feel like he's inflicting punishment, but that's not the primary purpose of the visit. I think people get anxious about it sometimes. It can feel a bit like Ofsted or a school inspection. I think Rich and I would say that's absolutely not what we're trying to instill. We would hope that actually what's happening is a really useful conversations between the Archdeacon and the church wardens, sometimes with the clergy person present, but actually the real connection or encounter on the day of a visitation is with the church wardens. It's an opportunity for the Archdeacon and or the rural dean to be in conversation with the church wardens about how things are going, how it feels in this place, any concerns, any worries. And it's one of those moments, one of the few moments now actually, where the parish rather than the benefice gets to come to the forefront. And actually for an hour or 2 hours, the Archdeacon is solely interested in what is happening in your parish in this patch. Now, you will have noted that very often the visitation is not carried out by an Archdeacon, it's carried out by a rural dean, and Rich and I would both want to record how grateful we are to our rural deans and our assistant rural deans who do this on our behalf. The legal responsibility for parochial visitations lies with the Archdeacon, but we are authorised to authorise others to act on our behalf. And when we moved from 3 archdeaconries to 2 archdeaconries in the late 2000s. I know we went back up to 3 again, but you know what I mean. When we went from 3 down to 2, it was decided that the Archdeacon simply couldn't do all the visitations for all of the parishes. It would have meant Rich and I doing about 230 each. So we got the help of rural deans and assistant rural deans who to this day very kindly assist us in that role. They happen every 3 years. It's a rolling cycle. And my advice would always be to a new rural dean who's perhaps discovering that all is not as they might have hoped, and they're starting a new sort of setup and cycle of visitations. Rather than doing them all in 1 year and then waiting 3 years to do them all again, it's much wiser to divide them into 3 and have a sort of a year A, a year B, and a year C. And to roll it forward like that, so that every year some are done, but not all are done. You just have to remember where you've been. And this is a legal obligation on both the church wardens and on the archdeacons. It's not a, well, I might if I could be bothered. Once you become a church warden, you are actually legally obliged to respond to these visitations. And the measures in particular, if you're interested in this sort of thing, the bits of legislation that actually really affect us here are the Inspection of Churches measure of 1955, the Parochial Registers measure of 1978, and the Care of Churches and Ecclesiastical Jurisdiction measure of 1991. So 3 bits of legislation. Don't forget, all of this will be on the hub, so you don't need to make notes. These bits of legislation are what drives the parochial visitation process. Usually, in an ideal world, before the visitation takes place, a date will be set. Diane, our PA, or Alison Barker, our other PA, will send out to the church warden I'll ask you to download the note for church wardens that tells you what's about to happen. There's an Archdeacon's parochial visitation checklist, just giving you a list of all the things. I think Rich uses these as well. I think we both use them. A list of all the things you need to just have at hand. And then, of course, the parochial visitation form itself. And the form changes every so often because we find new things to inspect or other things become irrelevant or tweaks in the legislation mean we have to change the form. But by the time the Archdeacon arrives in his Rolls Royce, you should be ready for what is to befall you. And it's lovely to walk into a church, and I always really appreciate this, where everything's laid out. And the church wardens have emptied the safe, all the books are laid out, there's coffee boiled, there's money on the table in a brown envelope, and all is set. And the other thing that is really helpful, church wardens, if you are able to do it, is if the parochial visitation form can be filled in electronically, it is so much easier for Rich and I and the other archdeacons to make amendments or alterations. I mean, don't worry if you haven't got that facility, but if you're kind enough to be able to do it electronically, it does, and even send it to us before we arrive, it can be a huge boost, and you're very good at doing that. Um, I'm going to breathe in for 1 second. Is everything I've said so far comprehensible? I can't see, there are so many of you, I can't see you all on the one screen, but is everything I've said so far okay? Yep. I'm going to carry on talking then. Lovely. A few thumbs up. Thank you very much. I really enjoy parochial visitations, and I know that Rich does too, because we've talked about it. They're a real privilege. I have no sense of coming to do a school inspection or any sort of trying to catch you out. What I've got a sense of is the privilege of being allowed into the life of the parish, to share with the church wardens in particular what's going on, and just to see these beautiful churches. I mean, it is a really fun day. I mean, sometimes I turn up and there's there can be a dozen people all lined up as a sort of a royal greeting party, and that's lovely. And sometimes it's just one or two church wardens on their own, and again, that's equally enjoyable. I would say to you, having too many people present can make the process of doing the visitation a little challenging. And I have sometimes, quite often, I walk in and start to do the check, and everybody's gathered around me watching what I'm doing. And I have to say to people, can you just go away and let me do the inspection? Because I can't for an hour and a half have you all breathing down my neck as I look at every single book. But it is good to meet folk and to be greeted and welcomed. That's really valuable. What we're trying to achieve is simply to check that all is well, and that we're checking it all as well in terms of the contents of the church, that what should be in the building is in the building. And we can all tell you apocryphal tales, but I a couple of years ago I arrived to find no silver in the church, told that the church warden keeps it in his attic. And so that's always an interesting conversation. Peter, you've raised your hand. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, it's a very trivial question in a way, but we're going back to the reference you made to have something digital. I've
Yes.
just taken over the church wardenship of this church, and the church is not digital. We are digital, and so I've got some of the information in paper terms, and some of it in my own computer, my wife's computer, and it's a bit of a confusing situation. We can't have a PC or a laptop in the church because we've got no connections there. So I just don't quite know how to do it, except
Well,
that.
I think it's a question of just if you can fill in the parochial visitation form itself electronically, and then just bring a hard copy with you. But what it does mean, if you have it electronically, you can email it to me so that I can amend it at home later on after the visitation. That's all I mean by electronically.
And do you want to know where it is? I mean, if we put it in the form that the information is there electronically, we won't have a, or we slightly tricky to have a reference how you would click on it to go to wherever it is. Do you understand what I mean?
No, I don't think I do. All I'm asking for you is to before the visitation, you send us the complete. You're meant to have the parochial visitation form completed, so
Yes.
you just fill it in, and either on the day give me a hard copy and email me an electronic copy, or do it before I arrive. That's all I mean by that.
Okay. All right. I understand that. That's
Yeah,
good.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Yeah, not at all. My pleasure. Again, it's just a question of checking that everything's where it should be and that the silver isn't in the church warden's attic, and that the log books aren't being kept at home because of the damp, etc., etc. So we're just checking all's there that should be there. The odd time something has gone missing is very rare, but some of our churches, most of our churches, have quite valuable stuff in them. Some of our chalices are worth £6,000, £7,000 each. If you're the proud owner of a 17th century, if you're a proud owner of a 7th century, you can retire. If you're a proud owner of a 17th century chalice, you're probably looking at something in the region of about £6,000 if it's in good nick. So these are valuable items. And so we're just checking that everything's there. Not that it's been nicked, but it might have been lost. We're checking that the registers are right, so that your various books, which we'll talk about later on, but the various bits of paper are all in order. And that includes the lists that you have of the stuff that you own, but it also includes the legal things that you need to make sure are in place. So it's about um, health and safety, it's about fire regulations, it's about safeguarding, it's about asbestos, it's about all of those things, which are housekeeping things, but actually, if we don't do them well, can seriously affect the effectiveness of our ministry. So at the end of the visitation, you should, Rich, whoever, the Archdeacon, should have an idea that all is well. I very rarely find major issues. Once or twice I've turned up and, the logbook is no longer, cannot be found. Sometimes some churches seem to slip through the loop, and therefore there are quite a few things missing, and that needs to be dealt with. But on the whole, it's quite minor stuff, just making sure that signage is right, making sure that you're displaying what you should be displaying about protecting children and young people and vulnerable adults. Make sure you're displaying about fire exits, about insurance, about contact details for key people in the parish, and just ensuring effectively that you're doing, it's a well-run church to the best of your ability. And I know that you all work incredibly hard to make sure that that's the case. The parochial visitation form is completed by the Archdeacon or Rural Dean after the visit. It's signed, it's sent to Diane, and we keep a record, and we also give you a copy of that. Um, uh, if the Rural Dean has carried out the inspection and not the Archdeacon, she might bring to the attention of the Archdeacon anything significant that they might have found. Once or twice in the past, I think before Richard started, so it is a little bit back, there's been a couple of times where it's been quite obvious that there's a common theme of the visitation. So one year, I'm making this up now, but one year there was an issue, I think, around the displaying of safeguarding officers' names on notice boards when we first started this process. And so I wrote a general thing to all the church wardens saying, can you please ensure that you have this displayed? So sometimes general themes come up. I might write to everybody and say, look, it's apparent from the visitations that large numbers of you haven't got this or haven't got that. Can you please make sure that you address that for the next visitation? So that's by way of setting the scene, as it were. Are there any questions about what I've said so far? Let's not get into the detail just yet, because I am going to go into that now. But are there any questions about what I've said so far? I'm just looking, I can't see everybody because I've got two screens, but I'm not seeing anything. So I'm going to push on. You should have been able to download before this session the parochial visitation form itself. If you've got that to hand, it'd be really helpful if you could turn to it now. The actual form that you would need to fill in on the day. And I think we put this alongside the talk on the hub so that folk could download it. Don't panic if you've forgotten to do it, didn't bother, couldn't care, or lost it. I'll talk you through it, but it might be helpful to have it in front of you. So, as I said, very often when we arrive, some kind soul has filled it in for us electronically. And it doesn't need to be complete, it's just they've done their best and we can fill in the bits that are missing. I essentially wrote this form about 15 years ago, I think, when I first arrived. And I've, Richard, your hands up. Peter, your hands up again. Is that meant to be up?
No.
No, okay, that's fine. So I put this together, and we've over the years we've changed it and amended it so that as regulation has changed, as the things we have to ask about have changed, we have changed the form. But the form I've got at the moment is the one we're using, um, and one of the reasons for the date of last entry bit is actually we discovered in a couple of places that we were missing some of the marriage certificates under the old system. That's quite serious because they're legal documents, and we found empty stubs, but no attachment and no record of why it had been removed. And so I thought it'd be easy to, if we had the date of the last entry and the number, then we'd be able to trace where things have gone awry. But anyway, just looking at what we've got here, your service book. What I usually do in terms of just how I do them, I usually do my initials are DHJ. So I do, in green pen, which annoys everybody, but in green, historians will know that there'll be an archdeacon with green pen in Sudbury at one stage. I put a DHJ and the date. So DHJ, the 11th of the 12th, 24. I just put the initials beside it so that the next person who comes along, who might be me, but it might not be me, and one day it will not be me, knows that 3 years ago this was inspected. And also at the back of some of the forms, there is an official place where church wardens and rector can sign. I always try to use that. I've noticed that it's a bit piecemeal, but I always try to make sure, and Richard's nodding, so I think he probably does the same, to make sure we sign that. Again, so that when people come to look at the various books, they know the last time they were checked by this person at this date, and these church wardens were present. So the easy stuff, service booklet, books, just making sure that all is in place. And, most people use a fairly standard service book that is bought SPCK or one of the other publishers. I simply initial the last entry. It gives me a nice feel for the parish. You can tell numbers, you can tell frequency of services, tells you a little bit about the life, what sort of services a parish is having. The bands book, I mean, clearly the regulations around marriages have changed, but the bands book is a really live, vivid resource for the history of a parish. Again, just checking. One of the things I do notice a lot is that the bands are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. People stopped. Quite often, people have stopped numbering them at some stage. It is really helpful to keep numbering them. So they should be numbered. So they should go from 1 to 600 or 700. Some of you are using bands books from the 18th and 19th centuries still. So I'm not suggesting you go back and fill in all the numbers, but it is a really useful thing to make sure that they are kept up to date and again kept accurately. Baptism, confirmation, again, just checking that, and again, I would just sign with a little DHJ and my date that these registers are there and are kept up to date. The regulations around marriage services have changed completely, so we no longer keep marriage registers, but we do have this register of marriages, this black book, which churches are allowed to keep as a record of wedding services that have taken place in the church. Lots of you have them. They were very expensive, I have to say, but lots of us use them. And again, it's an unofficial record. And it's nice for the church because if you don't keep them, there's no way that anybody who visits your church can know who was married there unless they go to the archives, which is, a much more complicated business. Burial, funeral books, and so forth. I mean, when I was an incumbent, I used to put in my funeral book and in my service book any service that I took, even if it was at the crem. And so if I'd put into my service book the funeral, I put after it crem, but I had a record then in my service book of a service that I'd taken place as the rector. Now, it's up to you. It's a matter of decision for you, really. But if you don't do that, quite often funerals don't get registered in your own parish records. So it's quite a nice way of just making sure that you've got it noted in your parish history. The record of graves. Oh, this is a nightmare, I have to be honest. So whether you've got an open churchyard or a closed churchyard, if you've got a churchyard, you will have had at some stage a plot book or a plot map that tells you where all the graves are and who's in them. You almost certainly will have lost the plot map or lost the plot, and quite often the plot book is out of date. But some of the plot books are beautifully looked after, up to date. Others look like the first day of the Passchendaele. So I think it's very varied. But if you've got a grave record, it's really valuable to keep it up. And it's a real act of love on the part of some local historians who will complete one for you and make a great big chart and have it all laid out. But if you've got something like that, it's an absolute treasure, and do please look after it. Okay. So that's the record keeping, really. Very straightforward. It's usually the easy bit of the visitation. People quite often have them laid out for me, so that when I walk in, they're all just there. I can sit down, have my cup of coffee, and just begin to go through them. And then, of course, there's the terrier, the logbook, and the inventory. Now, these are great fun because everybody always gets confused what's in what. So a terrier nothing to do with a dog. It's to do with the Latin word for land, which is terra. And so what it is a record of any land that you own, any property that you own. At one stage, of course, you would have had glebe property. You don't anymore because we've nicked it all. But you would have had glebe property, and so you'd have had a terrier. Most of you have not got anything in your terrier, or if you've got something, it's very minor. But the terrier is one of those essential documents. You all have one, but quite often it's almost empty. The logbook is like a diary, really, of the things that you've done in your church and to your church over the year. So if you were to, I don't know, I'm trying to think, install a new altar frontal, you'd put that in your logbook. If you have the gutters were cleaned, you'd put that in your logbook. If you had some work done on the tower, you'd put that in your logbook, so that when somebody comes, they can see all that has gone on in the life of the church in the last 3 years. The things you've done to the building should be in the logbook. It's a log. The inventory is a list of all that you own. It's a list of everything that you own. And if you're lucky enough to have been inspected or visited by NADFAS, which is now known as the Art Society, and these are these wonderful ladies and gents, usually of sort of 3 UA age, who come round our churches and they inspect, they do a complete inventory of your building, they take photographs, and they produce the most beautiful hardback editions and then give you copies. They are a wonderful record of your church. And so I would, if you've got one of those, you are much blessed. But an inventory is a book in which you've just, and take photographs. It's really important. And so if things are lost, God forbid, in a fire or stolen, you've got a record of it. You need to keep a record off-site, because if the church burns down and all your records are in the church, then you've lost your records. I strongly recommend that a copy of the inventory is kept at home. And even if it's against the regulations, I personally kept my inventory in the rectory because I just had a fear that if the church burnt down, I'd lose the inventory as well. If you've got a NADFAS book, simply keep one of the copies in the rectory. That solves your problem. Okay. How many of you have got NADFAS, the hardback? Yeah, quite a few of you. Yeah. I mean, they're still plugging away. They're now known as the Art Society. They're still plugging away. I bless them, and they do a wonderful job. So if ever they come to your church and say, "Can we?" They're not there to sort of case the joint. Be nice to them, and they'll ring me and ask for permission, and we'll say yes, and you'll get one of these lovely copies of all your goods. Anything there about that? We're going to have a fairly lengthy question and answer session at the end, so don't panic. But is there anything immediate you'll want to ask? Okay, if you could use the little yellow raised hand, that would be really useful. I think it's at the bottom somewhere, just so I can see who won. But stick a hand up, somebody. Yeah, John McNeil. Do you want to unmute?
Yes, you missed a detail there.
Did I?
What's it called? The deposits office.
Yes.
What is the deposits office?
Well, it's a record. No, it's not deposit. It's a records office. It says details of deposits at records office. So that's when you put your marriage registers into the records office. But you should all have done that by now because it was done a couple of years ago. So the registers should now be in the records office, not the deposits office. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, got it.
Okay, that's fine, Joe. Christine Stearman.
Has somebody got their mic on? Because there's a bit of interference and sometimes it's quite difficult to hear what you're saying.
Oh, right. So thank you. Well, I can't see it. If you're not talking, can you go mute? Because with so many of us online, it can make it an issue. Thanks, Christine. Any other questions? I'll move on. Ian. Ian, do you want to unmute?
Right, sorry about that. Wrong way.
Right. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
This NADFAS,
Yes.
is it something that we can request? Because I don't think we've got.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually, Ian. I don't know how they pick their churches. I think if you contacted them and asked them would they come and look at your church, your church would be of interest given its historic significance. So it's well worth. If you Google them, they're all the details of contact are there. Rich, do you know an answer?
They contacted me last year to ask if they could do 2 in the Archdeaconry.
Yes.
So
they do that with me. They always ring to ask permission, but I don't know how they pick the churches.
No.
But I'm sure if you wanted it and contacted them, Ian, they would certainly consider it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Did it cost?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, we'll have one then.
It's their hobby and interest. It doesn't cost. No. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get in touch. Thank you.
Okay, not at all. I think that's it. I can't see anybody else waving at me frantically. I apologize if I miss you, but I will move on. So next then, and then again, it's just making sure that all the things you should have in place as a PCC are in place. Now, I would say to you always, there's no sense here in which we're going to go, if you haven't got that, I haven't got that. Some of you are working with very small PCCs. You might have no PCC. You might be the only church warden. You might be the only person, actually, and he's hanging on with their fingernails. So we just need to make sure if you haven't got them in place, we will help you get them in place. And the rural dean will help you get them in place. So electoral roll and the numbers need to be displayed. And then PCC minutes, just making sure again that they're up to date. The annual report. The CCLI license, now this is important. The CCLI license is the license you need in order to use music, hymn, tunes, and words and lyrics in your parish. You should have one of these licenses if you are using music and hymns written by other people. They're not transferable. If you've only got it for the parish, it's only for the parish. You can't transfer it across the benefice. From time to time, the Performing Arts Society do flash inspections, and it can really catch you out. So I would always advise, if you think you need a CCLI license, go on the website, check, and if you do, it's a small expenditure, but it's worth it, because if you don't and you get caught, the consequences can be expensive. Okay. If you have a CCLI license, you need to display it in your church. Parochial fees table. Back in the day when Rich and I were young and had hair, you used to get this sent to you with your pay packet, and you could display a nice coloured one on your notice board. I think now you have to download it probably. But the parochial fees table should be on the notice board in the porch of your church so that people can see the fees that you are charging. Okay. PCC employment policies. Well, very few of you will have employees if you've got any sense, because it's quite tricky business. But you might employ a verger, you might employ an organist, you might employ a youth worker, perhaps. Most of you won't employ anybody, and you'll probably have your organist on a retainer or some sort of informal arrangement.
Carol?
But if you do, if you do, I'm just going to, if you could just mute yourselves, please, that'd be
Can
really
you come
helpful.
here?
If you do have employees, you need to make, you have a whole raft of employee legislation to make sure that you are conforming with. So it can be tricky, and we will give you help with that if you feel you need it. Insurance policies. Well, there are now more than one insurer in the field. Ecclesiastical is who most of you are insured with, but you will know that there are other insurance companies available. Trinitas is clearly a player in the field. I think Zurich are also in the field, and there may well be others. So when you're, just to say to you, when you're getting your insurance renewed, do shop around. Don't just take the first quote that's given to you. But whoever insures, you should have your insurance policy statement, your liability statement publicly displayed. And that will include employer's liability. The rules around this have changed. And I think I'm right in saying there's no separate employer's liability certificate anymore, but it is included in your insurance documents, and it should be displayed. Rich, I hope that's right, but I think
Yeah,
that's right.
if certainly for ecclesiastical, it's in the policy documents.
Yeah.
So it's just checking it is whichever insurer you're with.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And again, with all these things, just make sure you have them to hand, that they are displayed when they should be displayed, and that if somebody came and asked you for them, you would have them. PCC health and safety. Again, I know people think health and safety, oh my goodness, but actually, it's important that you have it. You need a policy, and there are pro forma policies that we can, that you can download, that we can give you. You don't need to write your own every time. We can give you a policy, but you do need to own it, as it were. And so you need to review this each year. You need a coordinator. So just somebody who's taking responsibility for making sure that it is looked at on a regular basis. Now, given today's news, I don't need to tell you just how important safeguarding of children and vulnerable adults is to the Church of England. And so these things must be in place. There's no leeway here. An accident book, hopefully empty, but if not, detailing what has happened. Safeguarding policy documents displayed. There's a generic one you've all got. It's in the porch of your churches. It's blue, I think now, and it should have on it an up-to-date name of the designated officer, and a contact number and details. I have to say I've very rarely come across a church that hasn't got this. You need to know that there are organizations that go around checking churches to see if you've got this or not. And if you do not, they will publicly shame you. They will put you online, and they will announce to everybody that you have not got the proper documentation in place. And then they will contact me or the bishop and tell us. We are in conversation with these people. They're coming from a good place, and very often, of course, they are victim-led. So, they know what they're talking about, but they are assiduous in trying to hold the Church of England to account, making sure that we do what we say we're going to do, and quite right too. So if you don't display, and they're in Suffolk, we've had a couple of cases last year. If you don't display, chances are somebody will notice it and make an issue of it. That's not the reason to display it, I have to say. The reason to display it is because it's the right thing to do. And please make sure you do. John.
Yeah, sorry, I can't find this yellow hand.
That's all right. No, don't worry. Yeah.
Have you got draft safeguarding policies?
Yes, there are, Rich, there are, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's worth just contacting our safeguarding team to get them off, to get some draft policies off them. There used to be a standard diocesan one, and you just put the parish details in, but they're a bit more benefice specific now. But we can certainly get some samples to you, or we'll add it to the pack that's online.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't got one, John, you must get one ASAP. I'm not asking you to answer that question.
That's why I asked.
They're very often a benefice policy these days.
So under safeguarding, just making sure, I mean, again, it's just one of those really sensitive areas. So you just need to make sure that actually all is in place and well. And then moving on, most of this stuff is fairly straightforward, to be honest. The building itself, your QI survey. I mean, I know a lot of people get very anxious about their QI survey, that it becomes a worry for them. But and sometimes the work, it can be significant and the costs can be significant. But the QI report will give you some sense of where you're going with this. And again, it's an opportunity when the Archdeacon comes just to sit down and talk about any issues that are arising. I'm not going to talk about managing asbestos because I think unless you want to bring it up in the question and answers, because it is what it is. Disability and access. People get very anxious about this. I mean, the regulations say that you need to make sure that you've offered disability access in as far as is practical. We're not expecting that a 11th century church has got a lift in it. But if you can, provide ramping, if you can make it possible for somebody to get into a church on a wheelchair or so forth, you need to be able to prove that you've done as much as is possible and as is reasonable. Okay, and most of you do that: ramps, large print, hymn books, and loop systems for the hearing and so forth. Very standard stuff. Fire extinguishers, again, fairly standard stuff. The electrical safety and so forth is the rules around this have changed. I think it's now right in saying, Rich, that that PAT testing is now every 3 years rather than just
used to be annually, but it's now every 3 years.
And certificates for your wiring is every 5 years, so it takes a little bit of the pressure off. But those are quite often documents that people struggle to find when I arrive. So if you can just make sure that they're bits of paper that you need to try and keep safe. But security of the building, it's difficult. We went through a real rash at one stage of lead theft. I mean, praise God, at the moment it's quite quiet, but they never go away and they come back, and every so often we get lead theft. It's heartbreaking. Smart water can help. Roof alarms can definitely help. And I think I'm right in saying that ecclesiastical will not pay out full insurance claims if you have not got a roof alarm. John.
Oh, hello. You skipped the asbestos.
I did, yeah.
Now,
I said I was going to skip it. Yes, yeah.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Right.
If there is no asbestos, do you need an asbestos test?
No, you would usually the way of finding out you haven't got asbestos is a test for it. But very often people know they've got no asbestos in their church. The place you tend to find it is in organ pipes or around the heating. And very often, if the church wardens are clear that there's no asbestos in the church, that's fine. The question says, do you have any asbestos to the best of your knowledge? So, yeah.
No, you don't need to test.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Church locked and unlocked. We would really encourage you to keep your church unlocked. Ecclesiastical have made it clear they will pay up if a church suffers a damage or theft when the church is unlocked. A locked church is not a mission tool. An unlocked church potentially is. So we do please ask if you can keep your church unlocked, whether it's 24 hours a day or just between certain hours. It means that I'm sure if you're on Facebook, you'll see that there are church hunters who go around visiting all our churches, and they're unkind in their comments when they find a locked one. So it doesn't do our reputation much good. But I realize in some places keeping a church open is really difficult. I recognize that. Security of valuables. Even when the safe is fixed to the floor or in the wall, they still will take it out. My first week in office here, somebody took a safe that had been fixed to the floor and they simply took a bit of the floor with them. They took the safe and the floor and left. So, but if you can, make sure that your safe is not just freestanding, as it were. Otherwise, it is more vulnerable. I've already mentioned the NADFAS Society of Arts report. Churchyards. I think most church wardens would agree that churchyards are one of the things that might keep them awake at night a little bit. Copy of the churchyard rules, please. And the new churchyard rules have just been issued, and they stretch to 4 sides, I've noticed. I've no idea, as it were, where you're meant to stick it. But it is proving problematic to try and get them displayed, but the new churchyard rules do need to be displayed. I apologize that they are rather lengthier than the old churchyard rules, but Burkitts very kindly have supplied us with copies. You'll need to buy a new notice board just for the churchyard regulations, I suspect, but if you can certainly perhaps put them as a sort of a set of 4, hang them up so people can consult them when they come and just check the regulations. I'm happy to, we come at the question session at the end. We're happy to come back to some of these issues. There's nothing else particular I was going to say. The churchyard generally keeping, one of the bones of contention has been, of course, wilding. So those of you who've got country churchyards and have decided that you'd like to let some of it go to the wild so that it encourages wildflowers, insects, and wildlife, may find that the local population are not quite so charmed by the more rugged look of your churchyard. That is a bit of an ongoing conversation, I'm afraid. But we are very supportive of eco churchyards. There's some very good examples across the diocese. So I would ask you please not to be faint-hearted about it and try and do something interesting and imaginative with your churchyard. But I realize in some places just keeping the churchyard in reasonable condition is a real challenge. Now I realize that's a bit of a trot round and trot through quite a long document, but I just wanted to work our way through. I'm very happy to take questions. I'm sure Rich will also be very happy to take questions, since he is dropping them right in it. But if anybody got any questions, please put your hands up. If you can find the yellow hand, then please do so. If you can't, don't worry. Dominic, you have found the yellow hand. Well done. Do you want to unmute and speak?
Hello, yes, thank you. I have been in conversation with Edmund from the Diocesan Advisory Committee on Churches and Churchyards to see whether it might be possible to have a summary of the churchyard regulations. I know he's somewhat opposed to that idea, but it seems to me that, for example, our safeguarding policy is quite large. Schools' safeguarding policies are quite large documents, but they're able to summarise them. And what I had in mind was a picture of a churchyard, perhaps with a red cross through some very obviously artificial flowers, for example, red cross against whatever else we want to be able to demonstrate to people. They shouldn't have fairy lights, I don't know, and other ideas and thoughts like that. So that people get the general idea, and perhaps a QR code linking through to an electronic digital version of the regulations, because one of the challenges we face as church wardens across our parishes is people aren't necessarily going to be persuaded if they're directed to a 4-page document of closely typed text. Whereas if they approach and they see, don't leave teddies, or whatever it is, don't plant trees on your plot, etc., etc. It's much more straightforward and easy to see that and direct people to guidance as to how the churchyard should be maintained and what our mutual responsibilities are. Yeah, no, that's a good point, Dominic. I mean, it's for the Chancellor to decide how the churchyard rules are displayed. At the end of the day, he'll make that decision. I suspect he'd say they need to be displayed in full, and that the moment of when somebody comes to book something for the churchyard, whether it be a grave site or an ashes site, that's the moment to talk through with them what's expected. But the point you make is fair, but I don't know that, I'm not sure that an abbreviated summary form would be acceptable to him, but it's not for me to say. But I'm sure Edmund will explore that. Thank you. Charles Baker. Charles?
Just 1 second, unmuting. Not really perhaps relevant to directly what you're talking about, but earlier on I clicked on the Insight webpage and found all the documents, including the main one you were talking about tonight. Now I can't seem to find where they've gone. Am I missing something? Obviously I am, but where is
on the link that you've clicked on tonight, I've just looked myself. On the link you've clicked on tonight that came through in the email, there's another line underneath that says Parochial Visitations. If you click on that, it takes you back to the page that's got the documents on. Yes, because they've closed the link for tonight's service, which is why it's all gone. But the other link will get you through, Charles. Yeah.
Okay,
so it should be there.
Yeah. Ian, and then Christine. Yeah.
David, you you mentioned earlier about pack testing.
Yes.
As you know, I rent my offices from the church. And I was talking to my insurance company. This is from my business point of view.
Yeah.
And they told me that pack testing is no longer a legal requirement. Now, is that a requirement that the diocese wants, or is that, as far as you're concerned, a legal requirement?
I didn't know it wasn't any longer a legal requirement. I think my view would be if the diocese is asking you to do it, you need to do it. I don't know is the answer to that. I'm quite surprised that pat testing wouldn't be a legal requirement. Rich, do you know?
Well, I mean, even the diocesan office, everything's regularly
Yeah.
tested if it's portable. If we buy new equipment and
Yeah.
etc. We've gone from 1 year to 3, and we often find small electrical fires come from such appliances. So I think we need to stick. We can find out for definite, but I'd be more comfortable if we stuck to it every 3 years.
Well, that's
So I
understandable.
think even if it wasn't a legal requirement, I think we'd still be requiring
Yeah,
it just for
yeah,
health and
yeah.
safety.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. We'll get it organised. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine.
With regards to PCC minutes, they're generally not kept at the church. Is it necessary to bring them in, or is it just enough to say we've got those at the secretary's house? Or
I mean, I like to see everything, and so people. I mean, my experience is that people do bring them in, and
Right.
I check. I mean, having said that, if somebody says they've got them, I don't say, "Oh, I don't believe you," but I think because I would sign them to prove that I've seen them,
Right,
and
okay.
check them. So that'd be really helpful. Yes, thanks, Christine. Matthew Sullivan. Hi, Matthew.
Hello. Just a quick question about what you need to display and where you need to display it. Is there a guidebook that goes along with the form to explain these points? Because I know that some of the things that you mentioned are displayed, but I'd like to go around and make sure before you arrive that everything is properly displayed.
Sure. Well, this form itself should make it clear what needs to be displayed and what not displayed. Where you display them is quite difficult, Matthew, because it depends where you. I mean, most people can display them in their church porch, but not everybody's got
Okay.
not everybody's got a church porch, and they don't all have notice boards. So some churches will be displaying them inside the building. I don't think there's any way around that. So you may have to display it in notice boards inside your church. Some churches display them both outside in the porch and inside in the church. So there's a variety of practice, but you do need to be clear that the safeguarding stuff needs to be displayed and the insurance stuff needs to be displayed. And if you can display it in your church, in your porch, that's by far and away, I think, the best, because if your church is locked, then people can't access the information. Yeah.
Okay, but thank you, just getting back to that other question, is there some sort of guidance beyond the form? Yeah, I mean, I think those who are in the know may be of the opinion that this is self-explanatory.
Yeah, no, sure.
However, I think people who are relatively new to the role may need a little bit more guidance.
When the visitation is being arranged, you're sent a church warden's checklist, and that should tell you what needs to be displayed and what not needs to be displayed.
Okay, would it be possible if when you're sending the recording of this or whatever other materials, that you could send everybody that checklist?
We don't send the recording. The recording will be available on the hub, so you can go back and listen to this talk.
Is the checklist up on the hub?
It's already there.
It should be.
It is there.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
That's on Insight.
Yeah, Insight. That's it. Yeah. Dominic, is your hand up again?
Yes, just a quick one. I just looked up on the government's website about portable appliance testing.
Yeah, and
the Electricity at Work Regulations 1989 require that any electrical equipment that has the potential to cause injury is maintained in a safe condition. However, the regulations do not specify what needs to be done, by whom, or how frequently. In other words, they don't make inspection or testing of electrical appliances a legal requirement, nor do they make it a legal requirement to undertake this annually. That doesn't mean, of course, that it's not a very good idea, and the
No.
insurers might require it.
Yeah.
Which is
Okay, thank you.
that's what made us go from 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks very much. Any other questions? Hands up or yellow hands? Peter? Peter, do you want to unmute?
How do we know when you're coming?
I was going to.
Well, they're done every 3 years, so every 3 years this will take place, and you'll be contacted to arrange the visitation. So if the rural dean is doing it, he or she will be in contact with you and arrange a suitable time for you to come. If I'm doing it, then my PA would be in contact and she would arrange for me to come and do it.
So it could be any time, subject to what you think when you want to come.
Well, it's done every 3 years. Yeah.
I haven't a clue when the last one was.
Well, I'd have to check, but it must be in the record somewhere. But I don't know when. But it'll be 3 years on from the date of your last one. Yeah.
Okay.
Your rural dean would almost certainly know when you were last inspected, and if you don't, we can certainly tell you. We had a look for you. Yeah. Are you the church warden at Stradishall now, Peter?
I am now. Yeah, for the last 5 months.
Okay. Right. Okay. Any other questions?
Oh, David, I was going to say on quinquennial inspections, we're very aware that architects are several years behind, because they're still catching up from not doing any inspection through COVID. So the inspections I've done recently, most of the QIs were 1 or 2 years out of date, and people are struggling to get their architect because they're trying to catch up. So we're just very aware of that. So just get if you've got a quinquennial inspection booked or due soon, just make sure you try and get it in the diary with your architect, so it's there and you know it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to say is we have a very small pool of architects who are accredited for this sort of work, and the pool is getting smaller as they retire. So, there's no doubt that churches will find it more challenging to get architects. There's still enough around, but some of them are carrying very heavy caseloads. So lots of you, for example, will be with Whitworth Partnership, WCP. They have a huge number of our churches, and so, but only one architect really who now does that work, and that's Philip Orchard. So clearly, as Rich is saying, there is a backlog. We understand that. We understand that. Any other questions or comments that people want to make?
I've got a comment.
I can't see who it is.
Peter Thompson.
Oh yeah, hi Peter. Yeah.
I would like to say one positive thing. I'm not very good at positive things, but I don't know if any of you have come across Toby Hart yet.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Well, Toby Hart, it gives a very positive set of information that he's in charge of repairs and small grants.
Yes, indeed.
And he is suggesting that if you need the engineer, then you set it up with a small grant, so that you justify that you want somebody to do something, and that's exactly what we're doing, and that gives some money in order to get the Philip Orchard into the church to do the work. And it does make it seem a lot more simpler than it was before I started, when I hadn't a clue how we went about doing this sort of thing. But Philip is Toby is very helpful and very informative, so he's well worth talking to.
He is, and I think he fills a gap for us now, because Toby's fairly new on the staff, and he's sort of the church support officer. So he's an ideal person if you're struggling. He's an ideal person to have a conversation with. The difficulty, Peter, I think, which you're finding, is if you come into a situation where there hasn't been a warden for a while, or things have been allowed to go, then actually you can inherit in a vacuum, and it can be quite difficult, because It's quite hard to locate the records, to know what the history is, and finding your feet in that sort of context is quite tricky. So, Peter, if anything we can do to help, please do ask.
Okay, and I did find that extremely the case. But when I came across Toby and we had a meeting, it was very helpful in that I suddenly realised I got somewhere to go, and I didn't,
Yeah.
I wasn't struggling around in trying to find things when I didn't know where they were. And so it's a it was a good way to. It's not the perfect solution, but it does certainly help. He is a very, very informative guy.
Yeah, and also your rural dean, if Eve is struggling with that, your rural dean should also be able to help you, and don't hesitate to contact. That's partly what they're there for.
So we contact the where we get that from the diocese, the rural dean from the diocese.
Yeah, well, Eve would know who the rural dean is, and she could give you the contact numbers. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
No, pleasure. Any other questions? I'm just going to go on to the other page. Anybody else?
You've got Dominic and Charles.
Oh, sorry, Dominic. You got another question, Dominic?
Not a question, but I've got a handful of books that I recommend to church wardens if they're new in post. One of them that I'd recommend is Practical Church Management by James Behrens, Behrens, which is quite an accessible tome. It's quite thick, but it's quite a quick and easy way of getting into some of these issues. It's got explanations of some of the terminology. That's exactly it. Yeah.
That's it. Church wardens training, I recommend to all of you. Church wardens training, I commend to all of you, and that book will be commended to you by James Hall, the diocesan registrar. It's an excellent book, and I've used it often in the past. I use it less now, but when I first became an archdeacon, I used it all the time. It's a very valuable publication. Charles Baker.
Yes, I just want to say we have Philip Orchard as our architect. Whitworth Partnership.
Yeah.
We've been pleased with all the work they've done. We've noticed no drop off in service. And I didn't want you to think, or anybody to think, that they were swamped too much, that they can't perform. They do. Well, he does. And we haven't a problem.
Good. I think they are busy, Charles, to be honest. I think if Philip was here, he'd say himself he's pretty busy. But yeah, that's great to hear. Great to hear. Thank you all very much for coming. In a moment or two, I'm going to knock the record off. As I say, this will be available on the Insight Hub, so you can come back and revisit it. If you've got colleagues who would like to have been here tonight but weren't able to be here, haven't heard it, then please do point them in that direction. Always, I'd say to you, if you've got questions or queries, please do contact your rural dean or your archdeacon. Rich and I are very happy to be contacted, and we will do all we can to help you. But to all of you, thank you very much for all that you do, and we wish you well. And I'm going to end the meeting now.